Hello and welcome to a Rivals of Ixalan draft here for Arcane Cards. My name is Damon, and we're getting into the part of the format where things are getting a little bit spicy. People are doing the blue-white Sailor of Means Ascend decks. There's people branching out and trying multiple colors, splashing the treasure. There's also just your straight-up, good aggro decks, your tribal decks, etc., etc. So there's definitely an interesting place in the format. So let's look at our opening pack. This is actually a pretty good one. We've got a few different routes we can go here. We've got our rare Deep Root Elite, which obviously heavily synergizes with merfolk, and you want to open this in pack 1 if you're going to play with it, because then you can build the deck around it. We've also got Forerunner of the Coalition, which is pretty strong in pirates. The Jungleborn Pioneer, which is a very solid green card, not just merfolk, and a Moment of Craving. It's just straight up removal spell. I've got 10 seconds left. I'd either choose here between Moment of Craving and Deep Root Elite. Deep Root Elite seems sweeter, and getting it pick 1 is kind of nice, although of course you can be cut off in merfolk if you take it pick 1, because if you get it later on, then it's less of a signal. It's more of a signal. It's less of a signal if we take it, because someone else might go into merfolk. But with that said, I take the Deep Root Elite over the Moment of Craving. Second pick, there's an Impale here, which is very good straight-up removal spell. It is in black, and it is double black, so kind of hard to splash it, but it's very solid. If I take a Moment of Craving, I'd be snapping up the Impale here. As it is, and I have this Deep Root Elite, I think I'm going to go for the Water Knot, which, to most intents and purposes, does about the same thing as Impale. Of course, there's not many ways to actually untap creatures. Is there any way to untap creatures? I don't even know if there is, but this sticks around on the battlefield, so their creature, if it has a positive effect or some ability, they could keep using it, whereas the Impale will get rid of it for sure. But Water Knot goes nicely with the Merfolk pickup, because Merfolk are blue and green. Outside of the Impale and the Water Knot, I think the next best cards in here may be the Everdawn Champion and Mutiny Sailor of Means, with the rest being fine. But I'm going to take the removal spell. So we've now passed 2 black cards as removal spells, so we can kind of expect black to be picked up on our left. We also have 1 merfolk payoff, although we might not end up going that. We could just end up being blue something. Looking at this next pack, there's a Deadeye Rig Hauler, which I do like in the merfolk style deck, which is kind of a tempo-oriented deck. There is also Secrets of the Golden City, which is pretty good if you're doing the Ascend route. It might be easier to, like if you can wheel these, it's better than picking up on, third pick. Outside of that, the pack is a little bit weaker. The uncommons are not great, they're not super powerful. Recover is strong, and it's definitely the best, black card in the pack, because there's only 1 black card. So I think our pick here is between the Deadeye Rig Hauler, maybe the Recover, maybe one of these, but I think it's pretty easy, just Rig Hauler. Or Secrets of the Golden City is a contender. I'm going to take the Deadeye Rig Hauler because it kind of fits with that merfolk theme, and see what we get past. No merfolk as of yet, which is kind of disappointing given this Deep Root Elite pickup, but there's some powerful, there's a powerful card in this pack in the Charging Tuscadon, which is very strong with combat tricks. It's quite threatening, your opponents kind of want to deal with it, and there's a Swaggering Corsair, not nearly on power level. I'm just noting the Swaggering Corsair being like we saw one last pack. These are the kind of things that can wheel and you're quite happy with in your red aggressive deck. Blue-red can be, can do some stuff. It can be quite low to the ground. It's got great 2-drops in both the 2/1s with Menace and flying alternatively. I think in this pack the only green and blue cards are so weak that I'm just going to take the Charging Tuscadon as the strongest card, and the Deadeye Rig Hauler and the Water Knot both fit into this strategy as well. Okay, here's the 2-drop I was talking about in the Goblin Trailblazer. There's also a Daring Buccaneer, which I'd rate behind the Trailblazer, and a Water Knot. So I'm going to take the Water Knot here because I've only, I've seen a bit of a signal for red, but Water Knot is a great card, and I don't really know which direction I'm going to go in yet. I'd prefer to go in the green merfolk direction if I can, because I think the Deep Root Elite is a bigger payoff than the Tuscadon, although if red happens to be open, then it would be better to be going down the red aisle. But either way, I'm happy to take Water Knot here. So here we've got some decent options. There's a Woodland Stream. We're not really going to be splashing a Deep Root Elite because we need to be solid merfolk to make that happen. There's a Sworn Guardian, which is a merfolk. There's a Naturalize, which is a good sideboard card. Evolving Wilds, and Colossal Dreadmaw. So all playables. I have to think about what's more likely to make our deck at this stage. I'm unlikely to be splashing something like the Charging Tuscan, although Evolving Wilds is always nice to have. So is a Woodland Stream. So is a Naturalize in the sideboard, although I don't know if we're green yet. Out of this, I'm actually going to pick the Sworn Guardian. I think it's the only on-color. I mean, this is a pick that it's definitely the weakest card in there, but I don't know. I felt like the green was a bit of a gamble in the other cards, and the mana fixing was just not necessary because we're probably only going to be a 2-color deck. So this pack has Shake the Foundations, which is a pretty strong card, although not necessarily in blue-red, more in green-red. There's a Colossal Dreadmaw, Stampeding Horncrest, which is just fine, although again, you kind of want to be pairing it. So I think out of this pack, it's kind of disappointing. The cards aren't that strong. I'd definitely take a Colossal Dreadmaw if we're going green. I don't know if we are, but there's a Shake the Foundations I think is a stronger pick, so I'll take the Shake. Here there's a Fanatical Firebrand, but I've been pretty impressed with this. If you've got ways to, got things to ping, like enrage targets, or you've got, anything that cares about, enrage, or you can take out your opponent's 1 toughness creatures. Pretty nice. However, I think I'm actually going to take the Aquatic Incursion here. This puts a lot of merfolk on the board, which the Deep-Rooted Elite is nice. We don't know, we're definitely not necessarily red so far. Even though red does seem to be somewhat open. But the Aquatic Incursion puts a lot of bodies on the board. It's going to be quite a powerful effect, so I'm going to take that here. So Soul of the Rapids is nice if you can enchant it with something. The enchantments you want to enchant it with generally tend to be in white and black. Oathsworn Vampire and a Legion Conquistador, a Brazen Freebooter, Soul of the Rapids, Strider Harness I have not been impressed with. So I think here, between the Soul of the Rapids, the Freebooter, probably between those two. Since I'm definitely blue, I'm going to take the Soul of the Rapids. Grasping Scoundrel can be pretty good. This leads you to some pretty nice curves where you start off with the Grasping Scoundrels. Could we be blue-black pirates? I guess we could. We passed all of those black earlier, but am I impressed with an Ogre and Armor Sword? Not necessarily. This is probably a gambling pick, but I'll take the Grasping Scoundrel. So here, Flight of Recollection doesn't really combo with anything we've got. Colossal Dreadmaw is probably the only one we'd consider playing, so we'll take the Dreadmaw. We only got 1 green card and the only 1 merfolk so far, or two merfolk, and this Aquatic Incursion. Gleaming Barrier is good in defensive deck, and it's probably better than Enter the Unknown, so I'll take the Gleaming Barrier here. Wow, Recover Wheeling is something. So a bit vague, that first pack. We didn't get any super strong payoffs. I mean, we got the Deep-Root Guardian, but then it didn't seem like Merfolk was open. So, that's not good. We might end up just cutting it. But we do have the starts to, some blue removal, which is nice. And, our second colour is not quite so clear. So here's a Hunt the Weak, which is not great, but still fine removal. Kitesail Corsair, which I think I'm going to take here because it's just a solid pick. Always going to be good, very good in Tempo Pirates, also good in Blue-Green Merfolk. Strength of the pack is a nice way to, make these Merfolk relevant, especially with, say, Aquatic Incursion, put lots of bodies on the board, then Strength of the pack. Admiral's Order is just fine, it's essentially a cancel. River Data, Sea Legs. I think, I'm going to take the Kitesail Corsair here, since I know I'm definitely blue. I'm going to stick to the guns, and there's no, Merfolk that's super pulling me in that direction. A bit disappointing. We get past a Legion Lieutenant, a Goblin Trailblazer, a Sailor of Means, and a Riverwise Augur. Right. So with these cards, I've only got really run red card in the Charging Tuscan, maybe just a bit of a signal that red is open. Riverwise Augur is a pretty good card, especially if you've got any way to shuffle, but even without it, it's good for setting up your next plays. I think it's safer, if I definitely knew that Blue-Red Pirates was the direction I wanted to be going in, I'd take the Goblin Trailblazer. They're very strong. But because I've kind of still got the potential of doing Merfolk, even though, a couple of the Merfolk have been cut and Merfolk aren't as strong in this synergy, I think I'm going to take the Augur. It's still blue, it just goes with whatever we're doing, and it happens to be a Merfolk. Passing this Legion Lieutenant along. Alright, here's a Zakama. Doesn't look like we're doing that. Sea Red. So this is very strong in that aggressive deck, the red one I've been talking about. It doesn't seem like there's lots of merfolk going around, so we could easily be supposed to be in this blue-red kind of tempo pirates deck. Or I could take a Crashing Tide. So, and there's also Secrets of the Golden City, which is fine. We've got 2 Water Knots. The Sea Red is good, but our deck doesn't really look aggressive enough at the moment. Like, if I'd picked up all those Trailblazers, I'd be taking the Sea Red, but I think I'm still just taking Crashing Tide at this point, and hoping that we might get somewhere. Protein Raider might be enough to shift me into blue-red. I mean, certainly the strongest card in this pack, because there's essentially nothing else for us outside of Secrets of the Golden City and the Horncrest. It is a pity we get it this late, since we don't get, a clue that we should be picking up Goblin Trailblazers, etc., etc. I will take it here, though, because outside of that, there's nothing in the colours that we've been picking so far. Merfolk Mistbinder kind of wants to signal to me that, Merfolk is open, which could be the case. With the Protein Raider, we could always splash it as well if we manage to pick up some other piece of fixing, although we've kind of passed on the Evolving Wilds and the Dual Land at this point. It's also a Dead-Eye Rig Hauler, which would be better, obviously, in the blue-red tempo deck. But the Merfolk Mistbinder, I think, is high enough payoff that, Merfolk might be open. With this and the Elite, I'm kind of incentivized to go for it. If I could pick up any other Merfolk, here's a couple. So, looking at this pack, black and white both have some uncommons. There's a Colossal Dreadmore, I've already got one of those. So I think it's clearly just going to take a Merfolk here. This Merfolk is barely playable, and the River Data can do some work. It is a Merfolk, and, it's passable on its own, so I'll take that. I hope we can get some more Merfolk that actually do some stuff. Expel from a Razka is a very nice bounce spell. The Sworn Guardian, a Blood Sun. Forgive me while I check the price of this. 0.47 tickets. It's not nothing, but I definitely think we want to take something useful over it instead. Expel from a Razka is a pretty nice bounce spell, and if you're playing Merfolk, you want to be able to bounce stuff. Evolving Wild would be really nice in our deck because we have this Augur and we wanted to splash the Protein Raider. Golden Demise, wow, that's going very late. This is an extremely strong card, often just a one-sided board wipe. There's also a Naturalize for the sideboard. There's no real way we can work the Golden Demise into our plan, unfortunately. It's just too hard to splash, so some black players are going to be very happy with that, but we're going to get a sideboard Naturalize. Alright, here's another River Data, and over a Negate and a Sea Legs. So I'm kind of still going down this. I mean, it's almost mono blue Merfolk at this stage. We've got the Merfolk Mistbind and the Deep-Root Elite as payoffs. Mausoleum Harpy's pretty late. That's a nice finisher for these black decks. I could take a sideboard Negate, an Overgrown Armasaur, or a Horncrest if we still think we're going any type of red. I'll take the safer sideboard pick in the Negate. Aggressive Urge is a decent combat trick. It cycles. Fine to play that in the deck. Another Negate for the sideboard. I'm taking the Frill back here over the Horncrest, since I feel like we definitely want to be going. We passed up on the opportunity to go red, and it wasn't super open in that time. So, really hoping that Merfolk is open in this final pack. The Merfolk in Rivals are not that strong, so it could definitely be, that Merfolk was open. It was just like the good Merfolk that, just happened to be also the Jadelight Guardian, the Jadelight Ranger, etc., etc. Have been taken by just green players, not Merfolk players. We did open a nice rare in the Ripjaw Raptor. Obviously goes much better in red-green, where you can trigger it with Shake the Foundations and all those ping effects, but it's still just fine. It's a 4/5 beta. There's a Commander's Speaker. If this wheels, we can kind of, guess that Merfolk is open. There's also one with the Wind, which is nice. Pounce, Jungle Delver. So hopefully we will get something back from this pack, even if it's just a Jungle Delver. But Ripjaw Raptor, gonna get in here. Protein Raider is still a maybe. We'd have to find a few ways to splash it, and the splashing, like the ways to splash, are kind of in Rivals, so it's unlikely we'll get there. Ooh, some nice options here. So there's Commander's Speaker again, which is very solid as a 1-drop. Commander's Speaker into one with the Wind is pretty hard to deal with. There's a Pirate's Cutlass, which even in a non-Pirates deck can make our Merfolk a bit bigger. It's also Shaper Apprentice though, and I think the pick here is the Shaper Apprentice. you know, it's got evasion essentially. 2/1 flyer for 2 is wonderful, and you know, it combos well. I mean, I just think it's a higher upside than the Commander Speaker. I definitely like the Commander Speaker, but we want evasive ways to win the game, and the Shaper's Apprentice is one of those. Hopefully one of these speakers will wheel. Alright, Overflowing Insight, which does interest me, and we don't really have the treasures to get there. And we don't have a lot of ramp, but it's definitely a nice payoff, a nice top end. Or there's Charter Course, which is just a solid, you know, value spell. This is interesting. I do think Overflowing Insight is a pretty good card. You do have to make it work. You have to do some work to make it work. Charter Course is always going to be good. Sometimes it's draw 2 cards. So I guess the question is, do we need the power level of the Overflowing Insight? Because if you cast this and you get it to untap with it, you essentially win. Or we want the reliability of the Charter Course. I think our deck is weak enough that we want the power level of Overflowing Insight, so I'm actually going to take that here. Pretty excited to play it because I've never played this one yet. Wow, okay. So we are getting pretty rewarded for the merfolk angle. The Shaper Apprentice, Deep Root Warrior, and a Savage Stomp. Unfortunately, we're going to have to take, I think, the Savage Stomp here since we've got a few removal spells, but the Savage Stomp is a very, very solid card. We don't even combo with it particularly well. We've got one Ripjaw Raptor, but it's a super solid removal spell. I would love to pick up one of these 2-drop merfolk, but the fact that we're seeing both of them this late means that maybe we'll get another one. Maybe one with Wheel, and Savage Stomp is just too good removal, I think, to pass up on. Can take the Stomp here. So, of course, now we don't have really anything that we're after. There's a Cancel, which I could take for sideboard. Crash the Ramparts, which is a decent combat trick, although kind of getting a little bit tied up in that regard. The Spike-Tailed Ceratops, which can go at the top of your curve to kind of block things. All viable options. I guess I'll take the Crash the Ramparts as a combat trick. The deck is trying to be a little bit tempo-y, and Crash the Ramparts could help with that. Jade Guardian versus Shaper Apprentice. Ooh, interesting. Jade Guardian, of course, wombo combo with one with the Wind, or any other auras that we can put on it. However, we don't actually have that many auras. E.g. any auras, so maybe Shaper Apprentice is just better in this circumstance. Jade Guardian is nice, yeah, but without that combo, it's just a 4-mana, give something, +1/+1 counter. It's fine. I think the Shaper Apprentice is definitely better than it at this stage. Pick up one with the Wind next pack, of course. There's a Cobbled Wings, a Fleet Swallower, which isn't really what our deck is into. There's a Spell Pierce for the sideboard, another Crash the Ramparts. Cobbled Wings does give a way to give some of our creatures evasion, but lots of them have evasion anyway. I could take another Crash the Ramparts. It's probably the pick over the Fleet Swallower, which is just a 6/6, and I don't really want that Cobbled Wings, so I'll take a second Crash. Another Fleet Swallower versus a Spell Pierce. I've got 2 negates, so I definitely don't need Spell Pierce. Ancient Brontodon I'm never going to cast, so this is one of the times I'm actually going to take the Fleet Swallower. Right, Commander Speaker wheeled, as did Pounce. Pounce less good in this deck because I don't really have any giant things. It is very good with Ripjaw Raptor, so that's worth considering. I've only got 13 creatures though, and I do want to pump the merfolk, so I'm going to take the Commander Speaker here. Kind of go into this more aggressive style strategy. See if the second Speaker wheels. Yes, it did. Alright, so this is nice. We have some early power. We've got some, very good merfolk payoffs in the Mistbinder and the Deep Root Elite. I have to count how many merfolk we actually ended up getting. This is terrible. This is such a terrible card. Dealt to creatures this turn. Gain Hexproof. I guess you can use it to blank a removal spell if you need. Okay, we did with one of the 2-drops, not the Shaper Apprentice, but the Deep Root Warrior, which is very nice. Take a Blossom Dryad. These picks aren't really... Wow! Okay. Jade Guardian with 1 card left in the pack. So that's nice. Deck kind of came together in the end. It did look like Merfolk was open, so it just so happens that shows you the power of well, not the power, the lack of power that merfolk have in Rivals of Ixalan. They've got a couple of good rares and a couple of, really solid, like the Jade-born Pioneer commons, but because they're not merfolk specific, they just go into any green deck. So they're often taken quite highly, and the merfolk deck is left floundering. Whereas in the final pack, it's easy to see that merfolk is open, where wheeling Commander's Speakers and getting Jade like Guardian last. Which is where you want to be if you're doing merfolk. So our deck kind of got there in the end. It was a little bit iffy in the middle, but we've definitely got some nice evasive creatures. We've got some really solid merfolk. We've got the Ripjaw Raptor, the Savage Stomp, some decent removal spells. Deck looks pretty good. I would have liked, an Evolving Wilds or two that meant we could splash the Protein Raider and then also good shuffle effects for this Riverwise Augur. The question is, do I want 16 or 17 lands? Overflowing Insight makes me want to play 17, but the cheap curve makes me want to play less. I also got the option of running some Crash the Rampart, which are pretty good in this deck, or a Razka Fullback. I'm not super thrilled about this Sworn Guardian. Let's just see how many merfolk we've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I guess. So the Sworn Guardian, what's its effects? It would be triggering Deeproot Elite. It would be slightly bigger with a merfolk Mistbinder. I guess those are both fine. Soul of the Rapids doesn't look at its best here. I have no real way to pump it up, but it is a way to, guaranteedly win the game. Also got Crash the Ramparts. My deck's kind of looking quite aggressive in the early stages of the game. Could definitely see Crash the Ramparts being good. So I think, my cuts are between Sworn Guardian and Soul of the Rapids. I think I'm going to take out the Soul of the Rapids at the moment. I've got some flying threats already and ways to block flyers, and I've got no real way to buff it up, and it just doesn't seem that great. So this would be 23. I either want to play 17 lands, because I've got this Overflowing Insight, or 16 and a Crash the Ramparts. My curve is pretty low. I'm going to take the 16 and the Crash, since my curve stops at 4, essentially. This is just in case I get there. Turns out Charter Course might have been better in this deck. I've also got Aggressive Urge, which I could take out for another land, but I think this is fine. 2 combat tricks. And top of our curve at 4, really. So, is this suggesting 10-6? I think 8-8 is probably just better. I understand that we want double blue, but we also want green on turn 1, and we want triple blue sometimes, but that Overflowing Insight is really for the late game. Probably going to be stuck in our hand most of the game, but if we ever get to cast it, we'll be fine. So, blue-green merfolk. We'll see if it's still as good in Rivals as it was in original Ixalan. See you for the first round. So here we are for round 1 with our blue-green merfolk deck. We lose the dice roll, so a little bit unfortunate for us because we do want to be on the front foot, but our hand is quite sweet to make up for it. We've got all of our right colours of mana, we've got a good curve of Deeproot Elite into a River Data, and hopefully some more merfolk to follow up. So we're definitely going to keep this. One drop Commander's Speaker will be, of course, the Dream Draw here, but we get a Jade Guardian, which is fine because it still fills out our curve and completes the all-merfolk theme. So no 2-drop to consider here. We're just going to play down our Deeproot Elite since it's our only play. Blue also doesn't really have many ways to kill it. They could bounce it or water knot it, but either of those are fine with us. So mono blue from the opponent means we're definitely going to do some work with this Deeproot Elite. So let's cast the River Data here. The question is, what do we want to put the +1/+1 counter on? It's an interesting choice because if they play a 4-drop, we might want to have a 3/4 that can kind of attack past it. But alternatively, they might not have anything. So I decided to put the counter on the Deeproot Elite since it means we get to hit for an extra point of damage here, and might also take it out of any removal range in case they find a black or a red source. However, they have a Seafloor Oracle, so we're both doing the merfolk thing. This, of course, is a super solid payoff for going merfolk. It means that, if you can get a bunch of tokens out, you can start drawing an insane amount of cards. Instead, we draw a Shaper Apprentice. So here we've got the option of casting any of our spells. We could bounce the Seafloor Oracle back to their hand with the Crashing Tide, but that doesn't really achieve much. I think the best play here is to use our mana efficiently. We can cast Jade Guardian this turn, and then next turn we can cast either both Shaper Apprentice and either a Crashing Tide or a River Data. So we can put the Jade Guardian down. I decided to put the counter on the Jade Guardian rather than the River Data. I could have made the River Data into a 3/4, but I feel like getting the Jade Guardian as a hexproof threat down is nicer, since the Deep-Rooted Warrior can start pumping up the Jade Guardian as well. Also, the 3/3 can block their Seafloor Oracle very well, whereas if we had, say, pumped up the River Data and attacked with both of our creatures, the Jade Guardian would be a 2/2 and would not be able to effectively block their Seafloor Oracle. As it is, they actually played a merfolk to buff the Seafloor Oracle, which makes it a 3/4. So I've got the option now of putting both creatures in front of the Jade Guardian, potentially losing a creature to a bounce spell, or just letting them hit me for 3 and draw a card. In this circumstance, even though they've probably got some kind of bounce spell, I feel like it's better to just walk into it. We've got so many follow-up creatures, we've got Crashing Tide to draw us ahead. It's not like we're going to be down in card, like, the only way we're going to go down is if they draw more cards than us. So I feel like it's better to put the block in here. Sure, we lose one creature if they bounce one of our creatures, and it has to be the River Data, so we're going to lose the Jade Guardian. But they didn't get to draw a card, and they used a Runaground. So used up most of their turn. Does mean we get to play the River Data down again and attack with this really buffed up Deep-Root Warrior. Now, when I play the Shaper Apprentice, I want to buff up the River Data so that it can block the Seafloor Oracle effectively. I don't want them drawing free cards from that thing. They put a 1 with the Wind on their Jade Bearer, which does mean that if they attack and we don't block, they're going to draw a card. Interesting choice here. Well, it's not interesting, but I can either chump the Shaper Apprentice on the Jade Barrier, which is a 3/3, which means they wouldn't draw a card, but I'd lose a Shaper Apprentice. Or I could block the 2 creatures on the Seafloor Oracle, which would kill it if they don't have another trick. I decided to go ahead and do that, and they actually Aggressive Urge, which still means that I take out their creature, they just draw a card. So I don't know if they calculated that right, or they just wanted to get the Aggressive Urge cycled. The next River Data is nice, since it means we can buff up our Shaper Apprentice and attack, and leave open our Crashing Tide to deal with this Jade Bearer. I'm not really scared of a dive down here, since at best it means that they hit us for 3, which is fine, because then we're only on 14. They really need to get some more stuff on the board, since we've got a really big army ahead and they're on 4 life. This Jade, the Deep-Root Elite has really been putting in the beats. They cast a second Seafloor Oracle, which is kind of scary to know that they have 2. But the Crashing Tide, of course, here is going to be very useful, and a Giltgrove Stalker. See if they attack, and they don't. So we've got our choice of using a mana efficiently end of turn, and I decided to go ahead and do that. Since we get to draw an extra card, we're going to be able to attack next turn for at least 3, and if we draw any kind of merfolk, 4. So take out their flyer, and they concede the game on the spot. Looking at our sideboard, we don't really have anything specifically great in this matchup. We've got the option of bringing in Naturalize if we feel that they've got Water Knots, or we've got the option of bringing in Negates to kind of counter their bounce spells, like we saw at Run Aground, which is a pretty expensive bounce spell, and we could get a good tempo advantage by bringing in a Negate. However, the rest of our deck seems pretty good against them. The Water Knots aren't great because they don't lock down the Seafloor Oracle permanently, but there's still a removal spell. We can definitely seem to have a lower curve than them, so we can just try and go under and win before the Seafloor Oracle becomes a card-generating engine in the late game. So I'm not going to make any changes. We'll run it back and see if we want to bring in either the Negates or the Naturalize. So our next hand is also on the draw. It's pretty nice because it's got a 1-drop in Commander's Speaker followed up by an island. We can't cast any of our other spells after that, but if we ever draw another land, we're going to hit Savage Stomp, and if we get any, a flood going, then we're going to have Overflowing Insight to back it up. And one more island, of course, means that we can cast Water Knot. So on the draw, this is a perfectly acceptable keep. Shaper Apprentice is a nice follow-up, even though it's not a land, because we can play that next turn and really start putting the pressure on with a 2/2 and a 2/1 flyer. And of course, any land after that lets us cast either Savage Stomp or Water Knot. Opponent has no second play, and we draw another 3-drop, so not great, but as we've said, we can still beat him for 2 here and play a Shaper Apprentice. So next turn we do want to hit a land, but it's even not at the end of the board if we miss for 1 more turn, since we've got some really good catch-up spells. Shana's Wayfinder comes down and thankfully draws a land, which means that it's not going to be a 3/3 and be able to effectively block our Commander's Speaker. We don't draw a land, but we do draw another really good 2-drop in the Kitesail Corsair. I decided to attack with both here, since my reasoning being that if the Shana's Wayfinder blocks, that's fine, because I'm not going to be able to block it anyway, and I'm going to have flying threats in the air. They might play something in next turn that invalidates our Commander's Speaker, and since we're stuck on 2 lands, we may as well get the trade while we can. Also, we know that they have Seafloor Oracles in their deck, and if they play that down, then we're going to have to block all of their merfolk. So the fewer merfolk they have, the better. Forerunner of the Heralds come down and reveals that Seafloor Oracle that we knew about. So if we could draw land this turn, it would be nice, since we could either water knot this Forerunner or Crashing Tide it. We instead draw another 2-drop, which is not the best, since this is one of our weaker 2-drops, but we are still attacking in the air for lots of damage. Unfortunately, playing this Sworn Guardian means we're either going to have to take a hit and let them draw a card, since they've now played the Seafloor Oracle, and the Forerunner is a 4/3. So I could either chump here or just take the damage. I decided to take it and give them a card. Get another 2-drop, so we've drawn mono 2-drops since we kept this hand, but it is a good one in Expel from Erazka. And now the Sworn Guardian can effectively block the Seafloor Oracle, which was my reason for not chumping the Forerunner last turn. Second Seafloor Oracle here is going to give them a pretty nice attack. We do actually have the option to stop them from drawing any cards if we put the Sworn Guardian on the Seafloor Oracle and then expel the Forerunner. It does mean they get to trigger the Forerunner again, but we do want to use up all of our mana this turn, so I'm definitely going to use the Expel from Erazka, so I may as well do it before they get to draw any cards. And we are winning this tempo game since they're taking 4 in the air every turn and they're on 8. So just attack for another 4. We draw the extra land now, and I decide that instead of Savage Stomping, which would kill one of our own creatures, we're just going to leave this Crashing Tide open. The only way they get out of this at the moment is if they have a flyer or a removal spell. Blue and green, their only removal spells are like Water Knot and Pounce and Savage Stomp and those kind of things, outside of a Plummet. So the only thing I'm really scared of is one of those cards, or a flyer, so I'm going to keep the Crashing Tide to deal with that. I'm not worried about them drawing the extra card, because if they draw the card they need, I can just bounce it most of the time. So they're going to draw 2 cards, go up to 7, but if they don't have an answer here, then they are dead. So they do have a Soul of the Rapids, which is still lethal because we can use our Crashing Tide this turn, bounce their 1 threat back to their hand, and then we've got the Savage Stomp to put on our Sworn Guardian, ironically, or indeed drawing a land means we can use a Jade Guardian, which is slightly more effective. We can put a +1/+1 counter on the Sworn Guardian, and outside of a cheap interactive bounce spell, then we've got 3 lethal, or 3 2-powered attackers, which will be lethal. It does show you the power of these aggressive 2-powered flyers. We played them just on turn 2 and turn 3 and just went to town, and the opponent had a bit of a slow start with their first play being at 3. So that's really the advantage of playing a tempo deck. Like the merfolk, just bounce their creatures out of the way and attack them in the air with evasion while they can't get out of it, and you'll win the game in a pretty sneaky fashion. So this is round 2. Once again we lost the dice roll, but also once again we draw a sweet hand with lots of merfolk in it. Kind of interesting to decide which one we're going to play first, the Deep-Root Elite or the Shaper Apprentice. The Apprentice hits earlier, but the Deep-Root Elite played earlier will mean that our team gets buffed up. Gleaming Barrier means that you kind of want to get over and ahead, but I also think the Deep-Root Elite is a greater payoff getting down earlier. It does mess up our curve a little bit, and the Siren Lookout here makes me glad that we didn't play the Shaper Apprentice, because then we wouldn't be able to attack through it, whereas now we can play the Shaper Apprentice and put the +1/+1 counter on it with the Deep-Root Elite, which means it has a favourable trade with the Siren Lookout. In fact, next turn, when we play the River Dart, it'll be large enough to attack through the Siren, so it works out well enough for us. I'm definitely not interested in blocking here. If they're not killing my Deep-Root Elite, then we're fine. They play a pretty powerful card in the Golden Guardian. I'll just bring that one up for you. So it's a 4/4 with Defender, and you can pay 2 to fight another creature you control. When it dies, return it to the battlefield, transform. So essentially, this just blocks the ground permanently. If they ever have mana up, you can't really attack into it, because if it's going to die, they'll just fight something, maybe lose it, but then transform it into this land that starts making 4/4s. However, luckily we do have an evasive threat that we can go over it and above with. And here I get to cast a 4-drop on curve, Riverwise Augur, put a +1/+1 counter on our flyer, making it a 4/3, and kind of get to look at our next couple of cards and keep the ones we think are relevant. Some nice removal spells here, with in fact 3 of them. Savage Stomp, Crashing Tide, and Expel means I'm definitely interested in playing the tempo game, killing them before they can get this Golden Guardian online. And hoping they don't have a removal spell here for the Shaper. They play Sailor of Means, which kind of indicates they don't have it. So I'm going to play River Darter just to buff up the Shaper Apprentice and keep open my Expel from Erazka in case they have a removal spell or some really nice trick. But they haven't shown it yet, and so I'm just definitely going to keep attacking with my Shaper Apprentice. They have a Reaver ambush here for the Deep-Root Elite, so I have to decide whether I want to use Expel from Erazka to save it. It's not doing anything currently. We don't have any more merfolk to follow it up with, and it's quite likely that we might want to save the Expel from Erazka to save our Shaper Apprentice, since it's our only evasive threat at the moment. However, in this game I did decide to use the Expel from Erasca, I think because I just wanted to keep the pressure on. Deep Root Elite with any other merfolk, of course, would make the Shaper Apprentice a 2-turn clock. We draw an Overflowing Insight, which is kind of a fail-safe if we don't win this game anyway. I'm going to attack with the Shaper Apprentice here, since next turn Savage Stomp is going to make it lethal, or any merfolk, since we now have the Deep Root Elite. And again, pass with Crashing Tide open to save our Shaper if we need to, or take out a troublesome blocker. Another Sailor of Means is not going to bother us, since we can't really do anything on the ground. They're keeping their Siren Lookout back this time in order to chump block, and they have a Resplendent Griffin. So they have 2 blockers here, but that's not going to save them, because we can use our Crashing Tide end of turn to bounce the Griffin. We draw another removal spell, in fact 2 removal spells in Water Knots, but we need to cast a Savage Stomp to make our Shaper Apprentice into a 6/5, which will attack for a clean lethal. So a pretty nice game there. The opponent showed us some powerful cards, Golden Guardian, the Ambush, the Griffin. Shows they're a bit of a, clog up the ground ascend deck, but we managed to get there by flying over them. So with that noted, let's go into the sideboard. For the sideboard, we saw lots of defensive creatures on the ground. We saw lots of 0/4s and 1/4s. So for that reason, I'm going to take out the River Data, which is kind of our smallest, our most expensive small attacker on the ground, and replace it with a Crash the Ramparts, which means that our ground creatures can actually attack through these walls a bit more effectively. Here we are for the second game of round 2. Our hand is pretty sweet. It's got a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and the Riverwise Augur to smooth things out later in the game. So we're definitely going to keep this. So I'm going to talk about this because this is an interesting stage of the game, and I played in a different way than most people would play on autopilot. I do a Deep Root Elite here, which instead of me playing the Commander's Speaker this turn, I decided not to play anything. My reasoning for that is that because Deep Root Elite, triggers from other merfolk, I can play next turn Deep Root Elite, and the turn after that Shaper Apprentice and Commander's Speaker, and put 2 +1/+1 counters on something. Now the reason I'm doing that in this game, when I wouldn't have done that in the first game, is that I saw multiple 0/4s, ground blockers, the 1/4 Sailor of Means, the Gleaming Barriers from the opponent's deck. They're really trying to clog up the ground, but they don't have much defense in the air, and they didn't have much removal. So the only removal I saw was a Reaver Ambush, which targeted things with power 3 or less. So if next turn I cast Deep Root Elite, if next turn, so if this turn I play Commander's Speaker, they cast a Gleaming Barrier, my Commander's Speaker is blanked. It's not really going to do anything for the rest of the game, and 2 damage isn't really going to change the race that much. Whereas if next turn I play a Deep Root Elite, Shaper Apprentice, and a Commander's Speaker, suddenly I can trigger the Deep Root Elite twice. My Shaper's Apprentice is going to be a 4/3, immune to the only removal spell we saw from the opponent's deck last game, although it is entirely viable to have another one. But it just turns our Commander's Speaker into slightly more powerful play than it might be otherwise. So that's why I did this rather curious play of not, in fact, doing the turn 1 Commander's Speaker. They do play Dusk Legion Zealot, so turns out the Speaker might have been good after all. We'll never really know. We did take this line because we thought it might be more effective. Play the Deep Root Elite. Hope they don't kill it here, because that would really ruin our day. Reaver Ambush, of course, here would be quite good, but even then, it's not the end of the world. They do play a 1/4, so our Commander's Speaker would have been blanked in short order. We do draw a second Speaker. I'm going to pump up the Shaper Apprentice, as I said, to get out of Reaver Ambush range. And so now we do have a pretty viable threat. Could definitely get impaled or water knotted here, but we didn't see them last time. It is a Ravenous Chupacabra, which is even better than all of those. I'm going to choose to cast a Riverwise Augur here and start buffing up the Commander's Speaker, since it might be able to get through on the ground. We're drawing some nice cards though, with more removal and a Kitesail Corsair, which can get through. Unfortunately, the Deep Root Elite can only buff merfolk, so we can't put those counters on the Corsair. Going to attack with this 4/4 here. We do have a Crash the Ramparts open as a combat trick, and they decide not to make any blocks. Play the Corsair down. The Ravenous Chupacabra comes in, which makes me think of either a Recover or a Bounce spell. It's an interesting choice. I could trade with it, but then I'd be down a card, and if they have Recover, it's so bad for me that I decided just to take the 2 damage, since it's not that big a deal. They do in fact have a Depth of Desire to bounce the Chupacabra again, replay it, and actually take out the Commander's Speaker, which is an interesting choice. I would have taken out the Corsair at this stage. Maybe they felt like it. They couldn't afford to, throw all their creatures in front of it and lose to a combat trick, which is fair enough. But I have so many ground creatures, I don't really care. Jade Guardian here is going to either buff up one of our creatures to attack, because we're getting 2 +1/+1 counters from the Deep Root Warrior, but instead I decide to play the safer route and just make a 4/4 hexproof. which is going to be a good attacker because they definitely won't be able to interact with that. Of course, hexproof with Crash the Ramparts is going to be very nice, and the opponent hasn't found any of their flyers here, so we're going to keep chipping in for lots of damage. Sworn Guardian is going to make the Jade Guardian a 5/5, which actually takes it out of range of being killed by their creatures. So now they effectively have to chump block this Guardian every turn. They do put the Chupacabra on it, and bounce the Chupacabra back to their hand, but with this play, I know that we're pretty much safe to trample over for a bunch of damage, so I go ahead and cast Crash the Ramparts on our hexproof creature. So they're taking 10 damage here. Next turn they're facing massive lethal attacks unless they can somehow kill, 1, 2, 3 of our creatures, because any of our creatures is lethal, and they scoop it up. So here we are in the finals, when we are on the play for once. Our opening hand has some very nice, well, it's all 2-drops in fact, but we have no blue mana sources, we've got no islands, which means that even though we've got all these early players, we won't be able to use them effectively. Since we would need to draw exactly island, and we'd need to draw in either, exactly the next turn to make this hand effective, I decide to mulligan this hand since we get the scry, and we actually can't cast anything in our hand. Our mulligan, again, has some not so nice things in the Overflowing Insight, which we're basically never going to be able to cast, unless we get really flooded out. But it does have a play in the Commander Speaker, 2 lands, and we might draw into some more lands. So, although not a great hand, I'm going to go ahead and keep this since 5 on the play is very risky. And we scry a forest to the top. So we definitely know we've got 3 lands, which is going to be a nice start, since any other land then is going to give us a Jade Guardian or a Deadeye Rig Hauler. Opponent has a mountain, we make sure to lead with the island, so that our Commander Speaker becomes a 2/2. Not much to say there. Goblin Trailblazer from the opponent, and we draw a Deep-Root Elite, which is fine because it means that we can play something this turn. It does get hit by a dual shot, but at least we don't lose the Commander Speaker and the Deep-Root Elite. We do draw a land here, and I've got a choice between playing the Rig Hauler or the Jade Guardian. I decide that since red is quite an aggressive strategy, I'm going to go ahead and use the Rig Hauler to bounce the Trailblazer back to their hand. Take a bit of time for them to recast it, and we also get a 3/2 on the board. It's not great because it does trade with the Trailblazer, but at this stage I was happy to make that trade since it's very hard to block the Trailblazer effectively, and they didn't actually take the trade, drew their card and scooped. So, I mean, I definitely think the opponent should have played this one out, just block the Trailblazer on the Deadeye Rig Hauler, take another 2 points of damage. Sure, we've got a Jade Guardian, but like, if they look at our hand, we've got 1 card left. Sure, it's an Overflowing Insight, and if we draw, 2 more islands, or an island and a forest, then we're in pretty good shape. But the opponent has 6 cards in hand, so they must have all been unplayable, or just been a little bit angry that they hadn't drawn their right colour of mana. So they scooped up there, and, who knows how this game would have gone, but I definitely wouldn't concede at this early stage. So despite only seeing 2 cards from the opponent, we can pretty much guess that they're a red aggressive deck. We don't know what their second colour is, but we can guess that it's going to be aggressive if they got Dual Shot and Goblin Trailblazer. So because of that, I'm going to take out this Overflowing Insight. I feel like we're either going to be dead by the time we cast it, or we're going to be winning the game anyway. And put in a Gleaming Barrier as just an extra 2-drop. It can block, not the most effectively, but it's still got a lot of toughness. It's an early play, and I feel like it might do some work. Other than that, no changes, and we head back in for the next game. So this is our opening hand for Game 2 of the finals. It's an interesting one because we do have the turn 2 play of Deep-Root Elite, but that is the only card that we can play with this hand. We'd have to draw another land, and then if it was a forest, we could play Crash the Ramparts. If it was an island, we could play Shaper Apprentice, which is a nice curve after the Deep-Root Elite, but we also saw from the opponent Dual Shot, aggressive creatures, and a way to get out ahead. And Deep-Root Elite, while it is powerful, is not particularly fast. So I decided to go ahead and mulligan this hand. It's perfectly fine to keep, but I felt like we could do better. So our next hand is kind of the inverse. We've got all islands and no forests with a Commander Speaker. Now we're getting into a little bit riskier territory. If we mulligan down to 5, then we might hit no lands and have to mulligan again to 4, which is very bad. This hand, while not great, at least can cast the River Data and only requires a forest to make the Commander Speaker and the Savage Stomp good. The Commander Speaker is probably not going to come down on turn 1, but with the Scry, we never know. So I go ahead and keep this hand, Scry a Sworn Guardian, and while I could also cast Sworn Guardian, I decided I wanted to hit a forest more than a Sworn Guardian. Of course, the Fanatical Firebrand of the opponent makes me wish I'd change that play, but a Pirate's Cutlass actually means that it was perfectly acceptable since now they're attacking with a 3/2. Drew another island, which means we can't cast either of our green cards. We can cast a River Data here, and next turn a Deadeye Recall. They attack with their Firebrand. It's an interesting choice about whether or not I block. I could trade with their 1-drop, but then they can just put the Cutlass on something else. And I really kind of want to attack with this River Data so I can put the Deadeye Recaller down with a raid trigger active. They play a Sky Marcher, so if they block here, which is probably likely since there's not much in blue, then that's fine. We lose a bit of tempo, but the Deadeye Recall at least can come down and potentially trade with the Firebrand. At this stage I do trade, knowing that they've got that Sky March to play and equip. We kind of need to save as much damage as possible. Drawing islands here is not great. I could have sandbagged this Aquatic Incursion. I thought about doing so. The reason being, 1/1s are not going to do anything on this board since they've got a flyer, and if I happen to draw a forest, I can play Deep-Root Elite and then Aquatic Incursion, which immediately puts 2+1/+1 counters on something, which could be a pretty big swing in the race. I was leaning towards that, but then I decided that, if we don't draw a forest and we've only got this 2/3, we're pretty screwed anyway, so I decided to put it down. They equip the Pirate's Cutlass to the Sky Marcher and put a Sea Red on it, attack with a 6/5 first strike flyer. We do happen to draw the removal spell we need, and no point in being defensive now, just attack with everything. However, Rekindling Phoenix from the opponent is going to be pretty hard to beat. We need our second Water Knot exactly in order to kill it, since the Savage Stomp will just, the Rekindling Phoenix will come back, which is why it's one of the best cards in the limited set, and in fact the set overall. However, we don't actually die because we drew a Shaper's Apprentice. It's not great because we can only play the Apprentice and only chump block it, since we can't activate our Aquatic Incursion, and we would just be throwing away creatures if we attacked. We've got no real way to bluff the opponent into not blocking because we've only got blue mana. I guess we could play a land second main, but the opponent has a Reckless Rage to take out our flyer, and a bit of a misplay on their part. They equipped the Pirate's Cutlass back to the Sky Marcher rather than the Phoenix. They gave us 1 turn's reprieve, which could be all it takes, you never know. We draw Riverwise Augur here. We'd have to draw our second Shaper Apprentice to chump the Phoenix, and then also our Water Knot for next turn to tap it down. We didn't, so we just scoop. Although the opponent could have made another misplay possibly and given us another turn, but I feel like that was unlikely. So once again we have the play. Our opening hand is not great, and if we weren't on the play I wouldn't keep it because it would be too slow, but it does have a Water Knot and a River Data, so we've got players and we've got all of our colours of mana. We'll have to hope to draw into some cheap 2-drops, but we do have tons of them in the deck, so it's entirely possible. I go ahead and keep this hand, and we'll see what happens. It would be nice to see Ripjaw Raptor in any of these games as well. Seems pretty good against red aggressive decks. Of course, the opponent has a turn 1 Firebrand, so we're definitely going to be under the gun here. Sworn Guardian, ironically, probably our best draw, although we don't hit that, we get another land. 2-drop from the opponent in a Goblin Trailblazer, and we hit another land, so things not great for us. We have to put down the River Data here, which will stop the Firebrand, and we've got no way to block the Menace creature, so we're just going to have to take our medicine. Swaggering Corsair comes down as a 3/3, which is a pretty nice attacker. My choice here is between attacking with the River Data, which would be bad because they could just block it, or playing a Deadeye Recall without raid, or playing the Incursion. I decided to play the Incursion since it puts 2 bodies on the board. It means I can actually block their creatures effectively, the Trailblazer and the River Data. They make some attacks here. Line up a couple of blocks. I trying to play around most of the combat tricks in the set is pretty hard. There's +2/+2 in white, there's +1/+1 and double strike for pirates in red, and there's +3/+0 in first strike. So one of those combinations is going to get you blown out. I decide to risk the least by putting 1 merfolk and 1 River Data in front of the Goblin Trailblazer, and taking my medicine. They use a Firebrand to take out my River Data, but that's fine, I've still got 2 merfolk left. We have the Savage Beats of the double merfolk attack, which I was kind of assuming they would block, but maybe they're fearing the River Herald's boon. I essentially just want to be able to cast my Deadeye Recaller and bounce back their most powerful attacker, since now we can actually attack with our Deadeye Recaller as well. Even though we're behind in damage, we might be able to turn the race a little bit, since we've got Expel and Water Knot. They simply replay back their Swaggering Corsair, and it's worth noting that the opponent has only played 1 mountain. They could definitely be holding the Rekindling Phoenix in their hand, and for that reason I'm pretty much going to hold on to this Water Knot for love or money until it comes down, because outside of Water Knot there's no way I can deal with the Rekindling Phoenix apart from bouncing it repeatedly. Swaggering Corsair is going to block our 1/1s if we care about them, and we definitely want to be able to block their Swaggering Corsair in turn, so I'm just going to make the attack with the Rig Hauler, play down our Sworn Guardian. Where is Where is Ripjaw Raptor? Where is the justice in this world? Sworn Guardian every game, no Ripjaw Raptor. They have a Sea Red on their Skyblade and a double attack here. I'm going to throw everything in front of the Corsair. If they happen to have a combat trick, I could consider using the Expel from Erazka on the Corsair, although I'm really more inclined to put it on the Skyblade. I also, last turn, counted up my permanents and discovered that I have enough for Expel from Erazka to put the card on top of their library, which is going to be doubly painful since they haven't drawn this extra mountain. So I line up all my blocks and then cast the Expel from Erazka on the Skyblade of the Legion. Opponent has a response, which is never great, although not much they can really do against a bounce spell. So they tap their 4 mana, and they cast Settle the Wreckage. So this is the play I really don't understand. I mean, I get that you might want another mountain for Rekindling Phoenix, but casting Settle the Wreckage on your own creatures, losing... I guess that's not too bad. They were going to lose the Swaggering Corsair anyway for probably 2 merfolk. No, for the Sworn Guardian. And the Skyblade was going to go back on top of their library, so they wouldn't have been able to draw it. So I kind of get why they did it, but this is still a pretty backbreaking play, excelling their own creatures in order to get lands. So of course we're completely happy with that. They go ahead and get their extra mountains, but they can't even cast Rekindling Phoenix this turn. I don't exactly have the greatest beats in the world with these 1/1s and 1/3s, but you know, 5 points of damage, 6 points of damage, which is definitely going to add up, and the River Data next turn is not quite lethal. They have an Ixalan's Binding this turn, but no Phoenix, which is puzzling because, of course, we had the answer in Water Knot. So, actually feeling pretty safe at this stage since the opponent is out of juice, and we have, you know, almost lethal on the board. Crash the Ramparts wasn't quite going to do it. Goblin Trailblazer is not going to stop us, though, so I just attack in and crash on our hexproof creature. Not playing around the second Settle the Wreckage, I might add, but we win the game. Opponent has 1 card in hand, and we're kind of confused about that Settle play because we really thought they had a Rekindling Phoenix, whereas maybe they just had nothing. Well, there we go. We managed to win the finals without seeing Ripjaw Raptor or Merfolk Mistbinder the entire game. Our deck was quite powerful since it had those evasive 2-drops and, you know, a few powerful cards in it. We definitely didn't play the greatest games in the world. They weren't the closest or the most interesting, but they had enough, you know, back and forth to show you the power of the 2-drop flyers, the power of tempo plays, like Expel from Erazka, Bounce, etc, etc. Really getting on the front foot with Merfolk, which is where they need to be in this format, and hopefully you learned something from watching it, and I wish you all the best of luck in your Rivals of Ixalan drafts. Don't forget, you can head over to Arcane Cards to watch more of my draft videos, to read some great articles, and of course to buy cards for your own standard, modern, constructed, limited, whatever you'd like. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time we do a draft here on Arcane Cards.